Word up, no rap, no crap, you bore me. One to grab my body, too lazy, hold it for me.
I mean, when you saying that, man, you know what I'm saying? You know what type of dude I am. You know what kind of muscle I got, you know?
Mack? Yeah. Nah, fuck that though. We can't curse.
Craig Mack was a mogul during the early days of Bad Boy. He was not only the first rapper to release a record under the Bad Boy logo, but also attracted massive investment capital, bringing names like Biggie and Maze closer to the world. But what about after that? Mack is gone forever. The sudden death of a rapper left the media puzzled, and the whole world asked, what happens next? The law will get involved. The police opened the file. A few names were brought before the public to appease public opinion. But then what does justice truly exist? Or is it all just a 30-second news report that disappears off the radar? Craig Mack was not murdered. He is suffocated by the very passion he worships, because of the knife thrust from the person he trusted most. And worse, the name of the perpetrator behind it all is still living comfortably richer and more powerful. Where are they now? Have they made an offer yet? Or is it Craig, who is the only one serving a life sentence? In this video, we'll revisit the Craig Mack case, a case that was never fully investigated. 1. Abandoned childhood and the origin of wounds. For most children in the world, the moment of birth is a sacred one, with parents rejoicing at the addition of a new member. But not with Craig Mack. His life is even worse than Hollywood's will hunting. When he was just 5 months old, Craig was left on the side of the road by his own family, not in front of a hospital, not at a charity center, but right on the ground, like an unwanted object. It carved an invisible wound that lasted a lifetime. I am a child no one needs. Fortunately, a family on Long Island picked him up, cared for him, and gave him a home. But a child who is saved is not necessarily healed. Craig grew up not knowing who his biological parents were, whether they ever regretted it, or if they ever thought about coming back to find him. Later, as he grew older, he said that anger was deep in his bones. Anger, because he had been discarded like trash anger, because no one from that bloodline had ever appeared again in his entire life. In Suffolk County, he claimed he managed to stay out of trouble and avoided the pitfalls of the streets. He wasn't born to destroy because the wounds of his childhood were too painful. They made him live like a guest in his own life, not allowed to cause trouble, not daring to demand anything, not daring to express what he liked. He's afraid that if he makes even a small mistake, people will discard him. And it was right on Long Island that Craig found himself naturally able to bend words to a rhythm. The rap community on Long Island at that time wasn't large, but it was enough to nurture a soul struggling to find its identity. The cypher sessions in the corner of the sports court. The older guy's punchlines made Craig realize his voice also carried weight. Rap isn't just a rhythm. It's a compass that helps him escape feelings of fear. At the age of 12, Mack began writing his first rap verses on paper. Before adopting the stage name Craig Mack, he was MCEZ, influenced by LL Cool J and Run DMC icons who made him believe it was a lucky charm for my entry into the entertainment industry. Luck continued to knock when Craig met Teddy Lee, a young DJ known as DJ Troop. The two children with that shared aspiration formed the group MCEZ and Troop, with nothing but ambition and a few self-recorded beats. But for Craig, that feeling of being trusted was more precious than gold. The obsession with proving oneself useful, so that no one dares to throw one away again. And second, being extremely loyal to anyone who reaches out to them, always sticking by them every day. In the rap battles of that era, Mack attacked the mic as if it were his only ticket to salvation. When he faced Eric Sermon, one half of the legendary duo EPMD, Sermon saw a warrior's fire in Mack's eyes. The Sermon got him on the EPMD tour, and for 2 years Craig did everything except perform, setting up the stage-clearing wires carrying speakers. A young apprentice reminds himself every day, opportunity will come. But EPMD broke up. 2 years of touring ended as if they never happened. Craig returned to the starting line. He and his friend and manager Alvin Toney sent demos all over New York. Result, the encyclopedia rejected the entry. And then the last phone call Alvin made changed his destiny. He called an A&R representative at Uptown Records, an old acquaintance, his last remaining hope. They agreed and arranged to meet at the Mecca nightclub. Craig and Alvin took a taxi immediately. At the entrance, Tony introduced Craig, and the person standing there was none other than Sean Diddy Combs, who at just 24 years old already had the eyes of someone who knew exactly who would make him money. Diddy wanted to test the talent, immediately asking Craig to freestyle right at the door. In those 30 seconds of freestyle, Diddy saw two things: a raw gem, malleable, easy to polish and mold into the shape he desired. Two eyes of a person always searching for a place to belong and original loyalty, an instinct that any wise producer would crave. For Diddy, that's the jackpot. A talent with enough substance to become a hit. And like every old fox in music, Diddy knew he was on the verge of a sweet deal. Bring me the boy who can bring in a fortune, without demanding resisting or going out of control. Shortly after Diddy brought Craig in to contribute vocals to Mary J. Blige's "You Don't Have to Worry to Build Trust," which was also the first touchpoint that introduced Craig to a global audience. But then Diddy was fired from Uptown and decided to build his own empire called Bad Boy Records. And from the moment Sean Combs left Uptown, he wanted Craig to go with him. What Craig found touching later became a double-edged sword that ended his life sooner. 2. The one who opened the era of the bad boy. Craig Mack was once called the torchbearer for Bad Boy, and that wasn't a casual compliment. When Diddy first left Uptown to build his own empire, he had nothing but ambition and no name big enough to convince distribution companies to invest a few $1 million. Even Biggie wasn't yet the king of the East Coast at that time, just a talent full of potential. And then just when Diddy needed something strong enough to put on Clive Davis's table to prove Bad Boy wasn't just talk, Craig Mack appeared with Flavor in Ya Ear. Diddy played the unreleased track right in Clive's room. No profile, no grand planning board, just a piece of music. But that was enough for Clive Davis, who helped shape both Whitney Houston and Aretha Franklin, to give his approval. A deal worth $15 million was signed, ushering in the Bad Boy era of dominance. And the bitterest part is the thing that gave Bad Boy that boost came from someone who just a few months later would be discarded as if they never existed. By 1994, Flava in Ya Ear exploded like a firework against the backdrop of a changing hip-hop landscape. The song not only climbed to the Billboard Top 10, received platinum certification, and was nominated for a Grammy, but also became the signature tune for the new sound of New York at that time. Without Craig Mack, Bad Boy wouldn't be on the map. But life is sometimes cruel at the very moment it seems most beautiful. A week before Craig's album was released, Biggie dropped Ready to Die, and all the lights immediately turned. The album debuted at number 15 on the Billboard 200, selling 57,000 copies in its first week, an unimaginable number at the time. 2 months later, it achieved gold and then double platinum a year later. Juicy, Big Papa, and Warning became the keys that transformed Biggie from a talent into an icon, and Bad Boy from a startup into an empire. When the shark appeared, no one looked at the hook that had pulled it up anymore. Craig, who had just put Bad Boy in the lead, suddenly found himself plunged into darkness by that very door. Everyone thought Craig and Biggie were close, the two figureheads standing side by side on the poster. But the truth is far from that. Biggie was blunt in many interviews. "My relationship with Craig is purely professional. It's all up to Puff." Biggie also subtly hinted, as if warning his senior, "Don't rely on Puff 100%. If the cash flow changes direction, he'll flip immediately." But Craig didn't believe it. Perhaps because he was older, he thought Biggie was joking. Or perhaps because Craig was the type of person who was loyal to anyone who gave him a chance. The shadow of his abandoned childhood still clung to him. While Craig still believed in Puff, Biggie was secretly preparing an exit strategy with the Commission Project, partnering with Jay-Z and Dame Dash to escape Diddy's control. One person is wary of the game, while the other believes the game is family. And, in Bad Boy, innocence always comes at a steep price. From 1994 onward, Puff's strategy was so clear it didn't need to be stated. In his eyes, Craig Mack was the hook that opened the door. Biggie was the shark worth nurturing. And in the business world, no one invests in the hook. Once its usefulness is over, it's discarded to focus on what's profitable. And this became clear very quickly: the music video budget, images, PR interviews. Everything was focused on Biggie. Even the Craig didn't like the beat for Flava in Ya Ear. Puff forced him to record it, saying, "This will be a hit." Yes, it became a hit, but it was also the last hit Puff allowed Craig to have. Biggie, on the other hand, was built up as the savior star of Bad Boy, representing the new sound of New York. Craig, once the face of the company, was reduced to a supporting actor on the very stage he had opened. For the photo shoots, Craig stood slightly to the left. Biggie stood in the middle. Puff stood right between them, looking like a director who had just decided on the lead role. Looking back, Craig was like the one who lit the torch to lead the Bad Boy army into the city. But when the city gates opened, the victors standing on the walls were Biggie and Puff. And he, the torchbearer, was pushed into the darkness behind them. For someone who was abandoned as a child, being seen and then turned away again feels like a stab right into a wound that hasn't fully healed. At that moment, Craig wasn't just angry, he was resisting. And it was the moment Craig began to resist that Puff revealed his true face. Not a leader, not a brother, but a boss ready to crush anything that was no longer useful. 3. When Craig dared to demand fairness and Puff reacted like a boss. There was a moment when all the ambiguity surrounding the relationship between Craig Mack and Puff Daddy suddenly disappeared, just like when you shine a flashlight into a dark corner and clearly see the mouse running right in front of you. Doubt turned into certainty. Respect turns into abuse of power. And brothers became masters and servants. It all started with a statement so blunt that anyone who had ever believed in the so-called Bad Boy family had to shiver. Gene Deal, Puff's close bodyguard, recounted verbatim without adding or subtracting, "If you don't fire your manager, you're no longer with Bad Boy." Not advice, it's not a suggestion, it's an ultimatum, a line thrown directly at an artist who gave Bad Boy the first hit in the label's history. Craig wasn't asked for his opinion, he was ordered. And the way Puff spoke, according to Gene, wasn't like an older brother trying to do good for his younger siblings, but rather like a boss, punishing an asset that dared to be disobedient. Just think, would Puff dare say that? To Biggie, never. The way Puff treated Craig at that time was like saying, "You only exist because I allow it. It's done after cutting." That was just the first kick. The second blow came from a public humiliation right on live television. During an interview, the host asked Puff about Bad Boy's plans. Puff, with the confident face of someone who controls all of hip-hop with his pinky finger, said right away, "Biggie is releasing Life After Death, and Craig Mack will have a new album in January." It sounds normal, but anyone who's observant will see the moment the camera pans to Craig. Eyes wide open, face frozen for half a second. What sent shivers down the viewers' spines wasn't that statement, but a truth outside the frame. Craig hadn't been informed about anything regarding the new album Puff just announced. It was he, the artist, the creator of the music, who was the last to know about the plan associated with his name. That's no longer disrespectful. That's disenfranchisement. It completely strips away the core value of an artist. And Puff does that right on set in front of the camera, as if Craig were just a line on a marketing plan, a bullet point. An asset can be used to fill a gap in the PR narrative. But the deepest wound, the one that turned Craig from hurt to despair, happened in the studio. The original plan was, this Craig was promised payment in installments during the album recording process. But the money didn't come. Once, twice, and then many times like that. And when Craig stopped recording to demand his own rights, Bad Boy, according to Craig, didn't come to negotiate, but to threaten. One of the lines Craig remembers clearly, "You owe us an album." Does that sound familiar? It sounded like a loan shark collecting a debt, not a record label talking to the artist who laid the foundation for their existence. Craig recounted in his final interview that he carried a gun when he met them. "I brought a gun," Craig said, his voice trembling but clear, "and I really wanted to kill that person." Although Craig didn't mention names, everyone in the industry knew who and which group he was talking about. Imagine an artist who was hailed a few years ago now has to carry a gun to work just to protect himself from those who once called themselves family. It was a sight that the press had never mentioned. But it's true. The truth is told by insiders in the voice of someone who has passed through the dark abyss. And if there was one metaphor that summed up Craig's feelings at that moment, it was this one. In Puff's eyes, Craig was just a battery, plugged into the Bad Boy machine to run and discarded when the power ran out. But for Craig, it was his heart, his youth, everything. It's not just about losing the contract. It's not just about losing the spotlight. But it's about losing faith in the very thing he once loved and would have died for, hip-hop. Craig Mack fans who were nodding along to every line of "Kickin' That New Flavor" back in the days of Flavor in Ya Ear will understand why Craig didn't fall silent due to failure, but because he was pushed out of the game by the very person he once considered his savior. And after this collision, Craig understood he wasn't just being abandoned, he was being pushed completely out of the game, excluded, locked out right in front of me. And when an artist is betrayed by both their record label and the industry, when the path back is tightly blocked from multiple sides, the only remaining question isn't, how do I make a comeback? But rather, where else do I have to go? That very question opened the door to the darkest chapter of Craig's life, where religion, loneliness, and despair gradually replaced the spotlight. 4. Losing faith and taking the first step into sanctuary. In the name of religion, Craig Mack didn't disappear overnight. He disappeared in the exact way that people in the industry fear, most silently, deeply, and with no one to defend him. After leaving Bad Boy, he thought he was just leaving a record label. But then he realized the entire industry had changed its perspective on him. The phone calls that used to ring constantly have now fallen silent. Studios that used to be open 24/7 suddenly have no slots available. Promises like, "Let me check my schedule," suddenly became commonplace. And the bitterest part is that Craig understood this was no longer about music, but what people in the industry call an unwritten blacklist. No documents, no announcements, but everyone implicitly knew you chose to step out of Bad Boy, so you're on your own. In those years, the second album, Operation Get Down, flopped, peaking at number 46 before plummeting like a stone thrown into a well. The third album was never released. No radio, no videos, no bookings. The name Craig Mack disappeared from the hip-hop scene so quickly that no one noticed the man who once opened doors for Bad Boy was slowly sliding into a bottomless, dark abyss. To fans, he's just a washed-up artist. But for Craig, it was the feeling of having his purpose in life stripped away. Recalling the early 90s, he stood in the middle of Puff's studio listening to the music playing, thinking that someone had finally recognized his worth. But just a few years later, the people who once called him family were the ones who slammed the door shut right in front of him. Some old friends in the industry are avoiding me. The person who shook your hand the day before acted as if they had never met you the next day. Once Craig said he was called in for a talk, but the look in the room and the attitude of a few guys standing behind him were enough for him to understand this wasn't a dialogue. That's the kind of threat that only artists at the bottom of the system get enough of. If you shut up, you'll live in peace. If you speak up, you'll have to deal with the consequences. From then on, Craig's mental state gradually deteriorated. He relived the shadow of his childhood, the feeling of being abandoned once again. Only this time, it wasn't by his parents, but by the very industry he had dedicated his life to pursuing. "I feel like I'm being kicked out of the very house I helped build," Craig once said. And perhaps no sentence better captures the bitterness of someone who once had a platinum single, but couldn't find anyone to give them a decent chance. In a life where the pain of abandonment is always accompanied by the fear of not belonging, Craig began to seek out the only place that didn't ask him about contracts, charts, or performance schedules, Ministry Overcomer. Contrary to media speculation, Craig didn't return there simply because God called. He sought refuge there because no one cared that he used to be a Bad Boy rapper. No one needed him to stand next to Biggie. No one asked about Puff. No one asked him to return to the studio. There he wasn't Craig Mack, the creator of Flava in Ya Ear. He's just Craig, another soul in the community like the other men and women trying to escape the wreckage of their lives. If in New York, you always have to prove you're still valuable, in South Carolina, the only question people ask is, do you want to be forgiven? Or do you want to be left alone? For someone who has lived for over 20 years, under the pressure of the spotlight, noise conflict rankings, and calculated handshakes, the peace at Overcomer is like the last umbrella still open when a storm rages. Although this group is considered a cult, Craig doesn't care. He fled showbiz like someone escaping an explosion, not caring where he landed as long as he didn't smell smoke anymore. In his rare videos from Overcomer, what's most evident isn't fanaticism, but exhaustion. A person's fatigue is no longer enough to fight for a position, no longer wants to argue with anyone, and no longer wants to reread contracts full of traps. For him, disappearance wasn't failure. It was self-liberation. But what the audience didn't expect was running away from the industry doesn't mean the wounds disappear. They just went from noisy to silent. It just changed from stage lights to the fading flashlight beam in a wooden house in South Carolina. It stopped bleeding externally to start simmering internally. And it wasn't until Craig lay down that the story came out. The dying words, the instructions not to involve Bad Boy in the funeral, details the press had never touched upon. It was that death, not any interview, that was Craig's final indictment of an entire system that had once stood on his shoulders. And it raises a bigger question: did Craig Mack die from illness? Or from being damaged for too long? 5. Death and last words. In his final years, Craig Mack lived in a place that at first glance you might think was a peaceful plot of land nestled among the trees of South Carolina. But in reality, it resembled a refuge for souls crushed by life more than a religious community. Overcomer Ministry, a name that sounds like a place of healing, became the place where Craig battled his own body. He lost weight quickly, gasping for breath, as if each breath was a negotiation with fate. He had to walk with a cane and often fainted for a few minutes mid-conversation, as if his heart was only functioning by sheer will. Those who spoke with Craig on the phone said his voice was choppy, his breathing labored, but one thing was very clear. He spoke as if he knew he had little time left to arrange everything for the end. He didn't have to worry about the will or the estate. What he wanted to worry about was the final boundary between him and Puff Daddy. During those years living in that community, Craig never mentioned his career Bad Boy, or even the days when the spotlight still called his name. But near the end of his life, he gave a warning that those around him still shudder to recall: "Don't let Bad Boy near my funeral." One sentence was enough to understand that the 20 years of silence were not forgiveness at all, but a scar. And scars always bring back the cut of the knife that created them. The irony is that when news of Craig's passing spread, Puff immediately appeared with a caption that seemed to be written by a brother mourning a close sibling. "You were the first artist to release music on Bad Boy. I will never forget what you did for hip-hop." Beautiful, long, and full of emotion, and completely opposite to how Puff treated him for nearly 3 decades. The person standing next to Craig as he was dying said bluntly and concisely, "Craig Mack went to his grave mad at Bad Boy." It's not disappointment, it's not sadness, it's anger. So angry, I want to cut the last ties that bind me to the place that once lifted me to the sky, and then dropped me as if I never existed. The man who helped Bad Boy secure a $15 million deal with Arista, which opened the door to Bad Boy's place in hip-hop history, ultimately died in a place devoid of colleagues' champagne or tributes from the faces who once stood with him in the legendary remix music videos. Craig's funeral took place quietly on the grounds of the Overcomer community without Biggie, as Biggie had passed away long ago, but also without Puff, without any Bad Boy artists, without industry figures, and without media. Only a few dozen people from the religious community stood around the crudely dug grave, covering it with soil by hand, because they didn't want any individuals or organizations from outside to interfere with his final moments. The final image of Craig Mack, who once had the entire United States nodding along to Flava in Ya Ear, was that of a man lying down in absolute silence. No flash, no stage, no artist's wreath. A small patch of land, a few prayers, and the wind rustling through the trees, as if the world were telling him that all escapes eventually come to an end. But what makes people shudder isn't the loneliness itself, but the deliberate choice behind it. Craig wasn't left behind. He is the one who closed the door himself. The person who once opened the door for Bad Boy to enter their golden era ultimately chose to tightly close the door of their own grave in front of the very people who had climbed over their back to reach the top. It wasn't just an escape, it was a silent sentence, a final answer sent to Puff not in words, but in a decision. You no longer have the right to enter any part of my life, not even the final moment. And when you look at the way Craig left this world, silently exhausted but decisively, you have to ask the question the press never dared to. In a world where record labels call artists family on posters, then treat them like assets in contracts, was Craig Mack a victim who was swallowed up, or the only one who dared to pay the price to walk away from that table? 6. Decoding Craig's life. What is most haunting when looking at Craig Mack's life is not what he did, but what he was forced to become. If he hadn't been abandoned in the Bronx as a discarded item as a child, if his biological parents hadn't placed him on the cold pavement, as if dropping a burden if fate had given him a complete family, instead of a broken start from the cradle, perhaps his life would have been more ordinary, even peaceful enough that no one would have known his name. A Craig Mack with supportive parents might not have become a hip-hop star, but he certainly wouldn't have lived his life in fear of abandonment. But life doesn't sign a contract with us before we take our first cry. Craig grew up without a family to choose, but the scars of his childhood chose to become deeply ingrained in every decision he made. That's the deepest reason why he's unconditionally loyal to anyone who's ever reached out to him. From EPMD to Puff. A child who was once abandoned has only one wish: don't leave me alone again. And it was that invisible plea that controlled Craig's entire life, like strings controlling a puppet. You are not weak. He's just someone who always tries to do everything so that no one sees him as not enough. That's why when Craig entered Bad Boy, he was like a new soldier, afraid of breaking the rules, always trying to be good, trying to do the right thing, trying not to complain, trying not to ask for more. He thinks obedience will keep him. But in an industry where survivors know how to bite back when cornered kindness can sometimes be a trap, Craig didn't realize that. And that is the source of the tragedy. He entered a game where the rules were never meant for the kind. If Craig had grown up normally, he would probably have known how to set boundaries, how to say no, and how to push back when pressured. But Craig didn't know. From childhood to adulthood, he was always afraid of disappointing anyone. That gentleness isn't a personality trait. It's a consequence of a deep-seated fear. Being abandoned once is their fault, but being abandoned twice is your fault. Try to look back at all his important moments. The first time he met Puff, Craig freestyled as if he missed a beat, Puff would turn away. When asked to change managers, Craig remained silent and did not resist, not because he agreed, but because he thought he would be abandoned if he argued. Even when treated unfairly, used like a battery and then discarded, Craig chose to endure. That's not weakness. That's a legacy of childhood. The child fears no one will choose them again. And that's what led to the most painful part. Craig's disappearance didn't start at Bad Boy. It starts from 5 months old. No one taught him how to love himself. No one taught him that he deserved respect. No one taught him that leaving a place that hurts you is not a failure. Therefore, Craig is always on the defensive against life, always feeling he must be grateful, even when treated unfairly. When he said, "I tried everything to keep them from leaving me," it was immediately clear Craig wasn't just talking about Bad Boy. You're talking about your whole life. The irony lies in this. If Craig had been loved from the start, he might not have rapped with that crazy energy, wouldn't have created Flava in ya ear, and wouldn't have left his mark on hip-hop. A Craig without scars probably wouldn't have become the Craig Mack we know. But in return, he might have lived longer, safer, less lonely, and perhaps not taking his last breath in a religious community far from home with a body that was only a shadow of the man who once rocked the 1994 hip-hop scene. What hurts Craig's fans the most isn't that he's been forgotten by the industry, but you don't know how to forgive yourself, not knowing that you deserve to live more fully than that. Looking at Craig, one sees a sad image, a great talent, who grew up with a broken heart. And no matter how fast he tried to run, how hard he tried to rap, how much he tried to prove he deserved to stay, that hole still followed him. Decoding Craig Mack is not just about understanding why he left hip-hop, but rather, it's about understanding the story of millions of Black people in America who have experienced this. When childhood is stolen, a lifetime will be an effort to piece together fragments that will never be complete. And Craig is the most stark proof. Sometimes success doesn't heal. The light doesn't compensate. And having a reputation doesn't help erase a memory that's ingrained in the blood. But the final question is what truly chokes up viewers. If Craig Mack had the choice of how he was born, would he have wanted to become a star? Or simply live a quiet but happy life? Perhaps only you can answer. But in the world, no one gets to choose that from the very beginning.
All data, analysis, and commentary in this video are presented based on information available at the time of production. The content is subject to change over time and should not be considered a definitive forecast. There is still so much more to explore, stories of resilience, legacy, and truth. Feel free to dive into some of our top recommended videos now appearing on your screen.